New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Well, hello there. This is Dr. Sydney Steen. I am the senior minister and spiritual leader of the North Hollywood Church of Religious Science. We are a oneness center for spiritual living. And I just want to invite you to something that I think is really, really special. In October, from the 6th to the 10th, at Unity Village in Lee Summit, Missouri, the affiliated New Thought Network will be hosting the most wonderful retreat. This will serve your soul. It will lift your heart. And oh my goodness, I want to call it an advance. So come hear wonderful speakers like Martha Creek, Sonny Cantrell, and the music will be off the hook with Ricky Byers. There will be so much there to support your soul. I hope that you will join us. You can go to antn.org. That's antn.org. You can get all the information. You can sign up. You can use a credit card, and it is safe and secure, and I hope to see you there. Have a blessed day.
Hey everybody, Tracy Brown here, and it is The Inclusive Church right here on the New Thought Media Network, 12 noon Mountain Time every Tuesday. Thanks for joining me today. Ooh, I can hardly believe that this is the last Monday in September. It feels like the whole year has been going really fast. But this month on The Inclusive Church, it feels like it went so quickly as we have been diving into the book, Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief by Michelle Cassandra Johnson. And if you have been able to be with us for any of the previous 4 weeks, I hope that you have gotten some feeling for the powerful message that Michelle Cassandra Johnson puts forth in this book, that it is important for us to heal the individual and collective grief that is present as the result of societal conditions and circumstances and experiences. So there are 7 chapters in the book. We've talked about 6 of them. And today I'll be sharing a brief summary of chapter 7, the taproot, what it means, the key points that she makes, an example that she shares as she begins to wrap up the book. And then toward the end, or at the end of the chapter, I think there's some really important questions that we can all take as our calls to action. So, hey, how you doing? I see you out there, and feel free to comment in the comment section if you're on YouTube, or in the chat if you are on Facebook or LinkedIn. So, the chapter, like every other chapter in the book, begins with a quotation. Here's the quotation for chapter 7, the taproot. If you are following along in the book, this chapter begins on page 127. So the quote is an Anne Lamott quote. I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. Repeating. I do not understand the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are and does not leave us where it found us. Anne Lamott. And I remember the first time I read this book, and I hadn't read the chapter yet, but I remember when I read that quote, I remember thinking, oh, Anne Lamott is such a great writer. And I love this quote, but it didn't seem to me to follow what I had read up until that point. You may remember from the conversation last week, there was a really big focus in chapter 6 related to the hive mind and how we all are part of one creation, one civilization, one society, one community, one church, that we're all a part of different groups, but whatever group we focus on, that we all are interdependent, and how important it is for us to do our part in order to make the whole work. And so when I got to the Anne Lamott quote, right after doing some great spiritual practice about bringing in the ancestors at the end of chapter 6, I remember I read this quote, and it's like, wait, the whole book has been about not the invisible element of grace, but our responsibility as individuals to contribute to creating heaven on earth, right? Or to creating the environment and the world that we want to create. And so it's like grace, the mystery of grace, it meets us where we are and doesn't leave us where it found us. And it just didn't seem to fit. Now, of course, once I read the full chapter, I had a better understanding. But if you are having that reaction because you've been following along, like why all of a sudden did she go to grace and the invisible mystery of grace? It does fit. So after spending, building up through the previous 6 chapters and introduction before that to the importance for each one of us to be self-aware and to take individual personal responsibility for contributing to improvements, for contributing to a world where we don't ignore the impact of white supremacy, being cognizant of our own responsibility to do our work individually, but the power of being interdependent and doing work collectively that reduces the negative impact of racism, of homophobia, of any grouping, sexism, any grouping that creates a hierarchy and an entitlement for some and a discrimination or um, depletion of resources for others. When she gets to chapter 7 and she titled it The Taproot, she brings the book together in a way that I didn't expect, which is also probably one of the reasons I like the book so much. So at the beginning of the chapter, she does take us back into kind of what was the foundation for the book. And I'm just going to read it to you. So take a deep breath and take it in. We were in the heat of summer in North Carolina, and the world was also feeling the heat in the aftermath of the acquittal of George Zimmerman, who was found innocent for the murder of Trayvon Martin. It was also the aftermath of Eric Garner, who was choked to death by a police officer in New York City, Michael Brown, who was murdered by a police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, Tamir Rice, who was murdered by a police officer in Cleveland, Ohio, Walter Scott, who was murdered by a police officer in Charleston, South Carolina, and Sandra Bland, who was found hanging in her jail cell in Walter County, Texas, after having been stopped for a minor traffic violation. It was the aftermath of so many more losses as a result of white supremacy experiencing Blackness as an atrocity. Every time I would pass a police officer, my nervous system would go into fight, flight, or freeze. I felt terrified and like a moving target. Being Black was a risk factor for premature death. These losses didn't feel like death by 1,000 cuts. They were not microaggressions. Instead, they felt like death by 1,000 gouges in my core and in my heart. Each time another Black person was murdered or taken from us because of white supremacy, it felt like some part of my soul and spirit was dying. I sought out a therapist because I was sure the PTSD I was experiencing was affecting every part of my existence, my relationships, my work, and my quality of life. I knew I needed help. The grief in response to those moments in our history threatened to swallow me whole, end quote. And so the concept or the idea of repeated abuses, repeated failure to receive respect, repeated situations that could be life or death situations for reasons that we like to ignore or we don't like to admit happen based on race or based on gender identity or based on ability or disability or based on any identity group that you want to focus in on. When that happens over and over and over, that there is that sense of PTSD, and there is the recognition that all of that leads to grief, mourning the freedom you have been told that you have by being a citizen in the United States, that grief of maybe not knowing each one of those people who were named personally, but knowing the story and the pattern of killing, race-based violence and race-based hatred over and over and over and over again. And the premise in the book is, right, she just keeps going back to that if we are going to heal, if we really want something different, in our society and in the world, that it is up to us to individually and collectively grieve what we have not had and then do the work to create what we want to create. So she reminds us of all of that in this early part of the chapter by using this example and a couple of others. And she does go on to share the story of finding a therapist to work with and what came from that and what she learned about herself. And after a few sessions of working together, the therapist said to Michelle Cassandra Johnson at one point, quote, "You are a taproot. The taproot extends downward and is the central line, the most dominant root from which all other roots sprout," end quote. And it's that, and she talks about what that meant to her and how she related to that insight from the therapist. But she also gives each one of us the opportunity to one go, oh, am I going to be that root? Am I willing to be the tap root for change in the environment I am in? Am I willing to be the one to commit to hold on tightly, to hold fast the commitment to be inclusive and to treat everyone fairly? It's so easy to say the words, but I treat everyone fairly. When people say I treat everyone the same, I kind of, my eyes glaze over because none of us treats everybody exactly the same. And that is actually not a good thing. We need to be engaging with people based on who they are, what their needs are, what their expectations are, what our needs are, what our expectations are, and what is our role in terms of why we're interacting. But that's a whole nother show. So when we commit to treat everyone with respect, when we commit to create a church where everyone can contribute and people are able to be valued for who they are, not who we want them to be, are you willing to be a taproot, the taproot that then other roots branch off from to extend that message, that practice, that belief? And that is a big part of what the author does in this chapter of Finding Refuge, through telling her own story about how she came to that realization with the help of a therapist, and then talking about how in her own life, in her own way, she recognized that she had already been being the taproot. And that was one of the reasons that she was exhausted. And that was one of the reasons why she needed to find refuge, because often that taproot is like the leader and everybody else is coming to you for guidance. And maybe you're not willing or ready to be the taproot for inclusion in your church or in your community, but perhaps you are willing to be one of the offshoot roots that lays a specific foundation for a specific part of being inclusive within the ministry. And I loved this quote that I'm going to share with you because I think it's true about anything we commit to. It's just in this context, we're talking about committing to collective work around grieving and collective work around creating an inclusive church. Let's see if I need to read anything before this. No, I'm going to read what I underlined. So just take a deep breath and think about when the way you want to influence inclusion as a core foundational way of being and way of living in your community or in your spiritual church. Quote, you must remember to remember. Remember who you are. Remember where you are from. Remember your wholeness. Remember. End quote. Repeating. You must remember to remember. Remember who you are. Remember where you are from. Remember your wholeness. Remember. End quote. And isn't this what we are charged to do related to anything that we're personally committed to? We've got to remember why we chose to be committed to that. We must remember why it is important to us, why we feel it is important to the environment or the world or the people. Remember that we came here to do this. Like, where did you come from to get to this point where you are willing to make this commitment? And we've got to remember that this is all about wholeness, creating or maintaining or expanding wholeness in ourselves and in others. So it's really, really important that we think about what we can do differently. And I think what Lenora is saying here is real for so many of us on so many different levels. Until this book, I had not connected my feelings of deep hurt and anger to grief. I appreciate her ability to express our feelings in a way that then enables me to determine how I best can stay centered in knowing we are all connected, even when these horrible acts of fate occur. Yes. And our spiritual communities are places where this kind of connection, that the things that are happening in the physical world are connected to our whole experience, and that we shouldn't stuff them or ignore them or spiritually bypass them, because we are having the real experience, the human experience, and we never ever want to pretend that that isn't happening. And our spiritual communities, our churches, are the perfect place for us to then dive in to do the healing work together. So if it's a community that I am going to be a part of as a Black woman, there are times when things happen in the news or in the world where if everyone who is in the same spiritual community as I am, if they're like, oh, well, that happened out there, it doesn't have anything to do with us. Or I've had people come up to me and say, this is not a quote, but in so many words, well, yeah, that happens out there, but Tracy, you're one of us. Or Tracy, I know you don't have that feeling or experience. And I'm like, PTSD is real. Yes, I'm having that experience. But what you just told me is you are not someone who I am safe sharing it with, because you will dismiss it. You will deny it exists. And then I just have to distance myself from you because you're not willing or you're not ready to engage with the whole me, just that part of me that makes you feel comfortable. Now, it's easy for me to use that example, right? Because I can use that example from the perspective of race. And I have friends who could use that and say the exact same thing from the perspective of being a member of the LGBTQ plus community and or identity, and especially the people I know who are transgender and are, receiving limited acceptance, or again, you personally are accepted because you're so brilliant. Oh my gosh, I love the way that you interpret science of mind and make it make sense to me. But you're not like, and you clearly aren't having any experience of pain or feeling any sense of exclusion like that person who was on the news yesterday. And so we compartmentalize and we put everybody in these little boxes, and they come to our churches and we tell them to stay in your box and you're fine here. I don't want to know if you have some grief about the way people in your identity group are treated. And just to make sure I make the point, this is not just for groups that have been marginalized. It also applies to people who are members of the dominant group. So I feel really blessed to know a number of people who identify as Caucasian or white, who get that we're all in this world together and that there should be no separation or hierarchy based on race or age or sexual orientation or gender identity or disability or. And even though they are white, and especially those who are white men, and to be able to say, I am being hurt by this separation as well, because I don't get to know the fullness of people who are not like me. Or I get chastised when I bring in or speak up for people who are in those groups because everybody says I shouldn't care about them. I should just take care of myself and use my privilege to benefit myself and my family. And so people who are white also are and could be, and I'd even say should be, grieving about the way that separation tears us apart, builds barriers, and makes it almost impossible for us to create heaven on earth. And so in this book, Finding Refuge, that we've been talking about and reading from all month, Michelle Cassandra Johnson, especially through the spiritual practices at the end of each chapter, has given us an opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into creating a different environment and a different approach to creating a community where oneness does not mean sameness. Of course, I chuckle every time I say that, because that subtitle for my book, Stained Glass Spirit, Building a Community Where Oneness Does Not Require Sameness, was, one of those unexpected but very welcome downloads of this is what you should say, because people will then go, oh, I want to do that. I want to have an inclusive church where we are demonstrating oneness, but everybody is their unique individual selves. So how are we going to close out this book, Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief? The author writes this: throughout Finding Refuge, you have moved through a journey of learning more about the grief that resides in your consciousness and bones, the grief that is held within our collective DNA. You have practiced, reflected, and hopefully communed with and moved through grief. You have made space to honor individual and collective grief, and you have been offered practices to respond to your brokenheartedness and to open your heart. End quote. I especially like to think about, you have moved through a journey of learning more about the grief that resides in your individual consciousness and the grief that is held within our collective DNA. And she then offers a spiritual practice that allows us to tap into the root of what we want to experience and the root of what we want to water or what we want to expand in the world as it relates to people navigating humanity together. And so for a call to action, I want you to think about two things. One, the taproot being that the biggest root of the tree, of the plant, of the flower, and of our lives. What is that? Like the deepest root, the central root that goes deep into the foundation. And then when we picture that, it's easy to picture then, yeah, but that's not the only root. There are all these other roots that come from the taproot and spread out. Because everybody isn't going to be the taproot for a movement. Everybody, every individual is not going to be the taproot for a shift in consciousness. Every one of us is not going to be the taproot for all the changes that we want to see. And so there are these additional roots that come from the taproot. They're the new roots that grow out of the taproot and expand or extend. In this case, we're going to say the consciousness of the taproot into other conversations, into other situations, into other organizations, into other places. So maybe you do feel like I can be a taproot for an inclusive church. And maybe you feel like, oh, there's someone in my spiritual community and they're really the taproot for us. But I can be one of the new roots. I can be one of the extensions of the taproot. Michelle Cassandra Johnson writes this. Now, take a moment to consider what you wish for the roots that are extending from the taproot. What do you wish to embody? What do you want these new roots to know, to share, or to reveal about our collective grief and our capacity to heal? And I'm going to add, what do you want your roots and the roots that you represent to reveal about our ability to be inclusive as we recognize and honor the grief that many people in our spiritual communities are experiencing based on their identity group. This is the work that we have available to us. This is the work that we can choose to do. But first, we have to be conscious of it, right? We do our work internally, and then we express it, and then we engage with others to make it happen. So I'm going to invite you to go within and to breathe. And I'm going to ask 6 questions that the author asks, and give you the opportunity to simply go within without having to think and explore what comes from divine wisdom that might represent your opportunities to either be the taproot or to extend the love of the taproot into different conversations, different groups, and different meetings. So let us breathe together now. And if you're sitting, you might want to rock back and forth, not in a strong way, like you're not trying to rock all the way out of the chair, but just a little bit to find your center. Rocking just a tiny bit, like a pendulum when it is about to come to center. And breathe into that wholeness, that space of stillness that is within. And as you hear each question, just listen for a word or a feeling that indicates some idea you want to hold on to or some action you want to take. As we think about the taproot and we think about the new roots that extend from the taproot, do you want these new roots, which represent future generations, to understand it is imperative to make space for feelings and grief? Do you want these new roots, which represent future generations, to understand it is imperative to make space for feelings and grief? Do you want them to understand how deeply connected we are to one another, sentient beings, and the natural world? Do you want them to understand how deeply connected we are to one another, to all sentient beings, and to the natural world? Do you want these new roots to grow into energies that recognize their responsibility to make cultural shifts that will decrease the presence and the impact of cultural trauma? Do you want these new roots to grow into energies that recognize their responsibility to make cultural shifts that will decrease the presence and the impact of cultural trauma? Do you want these new roots to grow with an awareness of the taproot and the space from which they sprouted? Do you want these new roots to grow with an awareness of the taproot and the space from which they sprouted? Do you want these roots to understand we can break down systems if we acknowledge the harmful impact of them? Do you want these roots to understand we can break down systems if we acknowledge the harmful impact of them? Do you want these roots to grow in ways that align with their intuition, their deep knowing, and the reality that we are all nature? Do you want these roots to grow in ways that align with their intuition, deep knowing, and the reality that we are nature? Taking a moment to be with these questions is simply an opportunity to begin the process of choosing consciously what roots we want to be, what roots we want to plant, what roots we want to support, and how we can nurture these roots so that the roots that we plant and that we grow actually become the foundation for something more akin to what we believe heaven on earth should be like, look like, feel like. And we're the ones who get to do the work. The author ends this chapter in this way: from taproots come generative energy, growth, depth, nourishment, remembering, and connection. Remember that medicine is brimming in your bones as you engage in the heart work to heal our collective grief. Hopefully, in the last 5 weeks, there's been one or two things that inspired you. And if you do want to know more or read more or get the details, please feel free to order Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief by Michelle Cassandra Johnson. Lenora, I love this comment because it is such a truth, like, capital T truth, that we have the example in nature of the aspen tree. An aspen spread through an underground root, and on the surface, it looks like many, many different individual trees, but it's one root network that they share. And how amazing it is whenever we think about and talk about the aspen, that we have the opportunity to think about what if we as human beings, right, as human beings covered 100 acres, as individuals who are all connected and all fed by the same spiritual commitment to creating a world where everyone is valued and everyone experiences love and everyone experiences respect. So in this book, while it is interesting that she doesn't talk about the aspen, I think she chose to, I don't know why she chose to do the beehive instead of aspen. They're both nature, references to nature. But there are many examples that we can use that allow us to get a visual in our head, like a visual aid to remind us that we are interdependent. And if you are experiencing a pattern of grief based on your identity group, if I'm going to be in authentic relationship with you, then I have to build the capacity within myself to hear and to hold your experience and your story. And what better place than our churches to be able to do that, because we are connected by a belief in and a practice of the same spiritual values. So that ends our series on Finding Refuge, Heart Work for Healing Collective Grief. It is so, I was going to say fulfilling, but that's not quite the right word. But it feels really good that we've taken 5 weeks to dive into this book. And I have a couple of other books that I think that will do the same thing with. One of the books that I've been wanting to read completely, I've read excerpts from, but one of the books I've been wanting to read completely is Awakening Together, the Spiritual Practice of Inclusivity and Community. And so I think that sometime in the next 6 months that I'll gather 5 or 6 people and we will dive into this book together and share our experience of the book with all of you. So if that is of interest to you and you want to be one of the people who comes on and talks with me about this idea of the spiritual practice of inclusivity and community, then just let me know. And we are going to close out for today. So what do you know? Or let me remind you that you can find out more about or sign up for getting a treatment, a spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer from me every Tuesday by capturing the QR code here and then registering if you're not already on the Treatment Tuesday email list. And if you want to go back and find some of the previous episodes of Inclusive Church, especially if you came in today and you're curious about the Finding Refuge book and things that we talked about in previous weeks, then you can absolutely find past episodes from the Inclusive Church at this link. I want to say thank you a lot for the people who came in and joined me this month, Reverend Rafe Ellis and Dr. Michelle Medrano and Clara Holston. I think we had some really great conversations, and I can hardly wait to do it again with another book. So that's it for Inclusive Church for today. Please, please, please join me every Tuesday right here on the New Thought Media Network. I'll see you again soon.
Thanks for watching The Inclusive Church with Tracy Brown. Join us again next week at 12 noon Mountain Time.
On behalf of everyone at New Thought Media Network, thank you for being a member of our virtual family. Your financial contributions help share the New Thought message with people from around the world. Please visit and contribute at www.ntmedia.org/donate. New Thought Media Network, come be you. And please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, peace and blessings.